What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 673. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's the gurgling anointer himself, Luis Scott-Vargas. We're allowed to say that on the show, right?
I mean, it's your preview card. You can say the name, I suppose.
It's ours. Yeah, we did get a preview card. We'll actually talk about it after we do the show this week, which is the Dominaria United Sunset Show. No, why are they taking it from us? We have to say goodbye to, spoiler alert, one of the best sets that we've had in a long time. We're going to fondly look back at it as we transition off of it and into what is everybody just calls MTG Bro, which is the Brothers War, which is coming up very, very soon. So before we get into that, though, let's talk about our sponsors. First up is TCG Player / Channel Fireball. Channel Fireball and TCG Player have teamed up to create a subscription that every Magic player needs. You can get exclusive CFB Pro content as part of the TCG Player subscription now. And you also get free shipping and tracking on direct orders by TCG Player. And you also get bonus bucks and some awesome promos as well. It costs $6.99 per month. So it's $6.99. And that gets you the free shipping and tracking on the direct orders, and now access to CFB Pro as well. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. And you can subscribe up if you're looking to get CFB Pro anyway. Hey, you may as well get this thing. It'll get you some extra shipping and that type of stuff. I've also got a link in the show notes for if you are going to be shopping, and it's like an affiliate link. It lets them know that we sent you over, and you can click on that, and it automatically will send you over to TCG Player and their marketplace, where you can buy all the cards that you need. Thank you so much to those entities for sponsoring us. Also, FTX, that's a place to manage all of your digital assets. If you're looking to do so, FTX.com outside the US and FTX.us within is the place to go. Make sure that you get all educated. You can even find some educational materials there as well about the types of products that you can buy, sell, trade on FTX. And once you're ready, once you feel good about it, once you feel like you got your feet under you, we do encourage you to head on over to FTX to do so. Again, there's an app and a website, but if you're within the United States, it's ftx.us, and if you're outside, it's ftx.com. We'll also remind you that anytime you purchase, buy, sell, trade, any of this type of stuff, it is a form of investment. You want to be careful with that. There is, of course, risk involved with it, so you want to make sure that you consult an investment professional before doing so. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. We just want to say thanks to everybody who supports us on Patreon. It really does mean the world. Okay, let's jump right into what is sadly our last Dominaria United crack-a-pack here, Luis, and let's see what we've got. Our first card out is Furious Bellow. That's the one in a red creature gets +3/+0 and first strike, and you scry one. In a set with some pretty good combat tricks and a bunch that saw a lot of play, this one's right on that borderline between sees play and kind of isn't quite there.
Yeah, it's not great, but when you're the deck that's attacking and they're the deck that's defending, it's 2 mana to basically kill any blocking creature, scry one. So
right,
it's pretty close to that, right? You're playing the 5-color deck. You tap out for your 4/6. They attack you with a 3/3. A lot of the time, you are going to block. So.
Yeah. Exactly. So fine. Next is Pixie Illusionist, a card I never really warmed up to. I know some people play it, but every time I did, it felt underpowered on either mode. It's the blue 1/1 flyer that you can tap to fix your mana, or you can kick it for an additional 3 and a green to get the 2+1/+1 counters on it. I just felt like 5 mana 3/3 flyer wasn't up to snuff, and 1 mana 1/1 flyer with a side ability was more like a bailout plan. Like, it meant my mana wasn't good, and so I needed to run something like this, and that was really the only times when I did.
I liked it a little bit more than you did. I found it, if your deck was powerful enough and didn't have like perfect mana, this card was worth playing, and I tended to play it.
Next one was not. It was Hexbane Tortoise. Like, I never really saw any play. Soaring Drake. Strictly better Windrake, but shows us how far the game has come along. Definitely a card you could put into your deck, but it was never a high pick, never something that you were excited to see.
Yeah, it's a solid kind of role player. The definition of a C.
Right. It's just like a solid C. Goblin Picker. This card actually saw some play. This is the one that lets you rummage.
Yeah, this looked kind of bad, but it ended up being kind of good. It was good in aggressive decks.
Not bad. Next is Take Up the Shield, which according to 17 Lands is the best white common. I actually didn't have it picked for that. But this is the premium combat trick at the common level. This thing can swing races, save your creature, win combat, leaves a counter behind. This is a pushed card. Like this could have cost 3 and still would have seen a little bit of play. But Take Up the Shield at 2 is well worth it.
Yeah, when you're able to like kill one of their creatures, gain 4 life, and be left with a +1/+1 counter, you know, when you're 3/3 battles, they're 4/4. You feel pretty good about that exchange. And the card, the fact that it stopped removal spells is
Yeah, it also worked well with Enlist, where, you know, you kind of put multiple eggs into one basket via Enlist, and then this would allow you to protect that basket, but then also get a huge life swing, you know, where you go like attack, Enlist, and then like, okay, use my removal spell. And you're like, Take Up the Shield. So instead of this thing being like 2 power, it goes to 4 and then 5, and you get to still slam. And even if they just let it through, they're taking a whole bunch of damage. Phyrexian Warhorse. Meh.
Oh, it was a workhorse.
Yeah. What about Gaia's Might? This is one that you had your eye on early, and you were proven right. You know, you were saying, no, that, you know, sure, you get a little bit of an upgrade on like a giant growth or something like that, but you really zeroed in on the fact that it was 1 mana and it had really a pretty obscene ceiling of being +5/+5 was enough. And it was. It ended up being the best green common.
Yeah, it's just really efficient. Rate matters, and 1 mana for +4/+4 even is just so far above the curve that you'd normally get that, you know, we're seeing giant growth, right? It gets reprinted every now and then. I think it's in Brothers War.
It is, yeah.
As well, and like that's a good rate. I'll tell you right now, 1 mana for +3/+3 is just a good deal. And Gaia's Might being quite a bit better than that sometimes was huge. Sometimes you just have 2 in your hand and just kill your opponent from 12 life.
Yeah, that happened. And the lifelink life swings could matter too. Defensively, it got used a fair bit. It was really flexible. Next is a card that I was much higher on at the beginning of the format. It fell off a bit for me. It's G2 Amplifier. I still like it. I still think you can play it in blue-red and it's okay. But I really did think that it would be kind of the go-to common. And it is good, but it's not as good as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I don't think it was even good.
Really? You just think it was bad?
I wasn't very impressed by it, yeah.
Wow. I thought it was, I mean, wait, so like you think it's like closer to unplayable than, you know, and I mean that in the like looser sense than
yeah,
playable?
I just think that you ended up not getting enough out of the deal at 2 or 5 mana. So I tended not to play this card. I think I played this card just a handful of times overall.
Okay, let's see how it did on the thing. Did okay. Had 55% win rate, games in hand win rate on 17 lands. That puts it just a hair above dead average, though, because usually you have to accommodate somewhere around 3 or 4% because 17 lands users are kind of power users. They're better players than the average player. So if a card says 55%, it's more like 51, 52, 50, somewhere in that range. So yeah, that bears that out. I mean, that is not where you want to be. Next card, however, is much better. It's Essence Scatter. And this card, we had it tagged early to be good, and it certainly lived up.
Yeah, Essence Scatter is fantastic. And I never really felt like I even hit diminishing returns. I remember playing like 5 in a deck, and it was fine.
Mm-hmm. I would take it here for sure. I like it better than any of these cards.
This would be the card I'd be taking right now.
Yeah.
Not the best selection, but yeah.
And that brings us to the uncommons. First one is Urg, Spawn of Turg. That's the black green star 5 that gets bigger for the lands in your yard, and you can sack lands to gain life, and you get to, what is it, surveil on your upkeep or something? Yeah.
Yeah, so your upkeep, you surveil. It's gonna come out as a 0/5, but starts, gets a little bit bigger once you start surveilling or sacking lands, and it can gain you some life.
Mm-hmm.
Berg is not a card I would pick first. It's like, behind a couple other cards here, but it is a good card. If you have the mana to cast it, you should generally be putting it in your deck. That's just the tricky part, is you don't always have the mana to cast it.
Yeah. And the double black can be a little tough there. Next is Cult Conscript. That's black for the 2/1 that ETB's tapped, and you can bring it back if a non-skeleton died this turn under your control. Kind of interesting. Generally not the type of card that I went for. It seems like an aggressive card or a card that, has sacrifice synergies, and it is both of those things. But you really need some ways to work it. But if you do, I saw some decks where I'm like, okay, I get it. Like that Cult Conscript is actually pretty darn good in your deck. If you've got some of the Gibbering Barricades or other ways to repeatedly sack stuff.
Also, sometimes your opponent just goes Swamp Cult Conscript. You play your tap land. They attack you for 2 and then play a 2-drop, and you just feel like you've already kind of lost control of the game. Like the game's already, in a really bad spot for you.
Yes, that's true. And it does. Sometimes it gets in for 6 or 8 damage even. I still like Essence Scatter over both Urg and Cult Conscript, though. Do you agree with that?
I think that Essence Scatter and Cult Conscript are pretty close, but I would take Essence Scatter, kind of knowing where I end up wanting to go most of the time.
Okay. Last uncommon is Battle Wing Mystic. That's the 1 and a blue 2/1 flyer. And you can kick it for red to discard your hand and draw 2 cards. And of course, the joke being that you wait until it's the last card in your hand, or maybe you just have like 1 bad spell or land, and then you get to effectively draw 2 off of it. Certainly powerful.
Oh, it's a great card. I would take that over Essence Scatter. Like,
yeah,
2 mana for a 2/1 flyer is a pretty solid card. Like, you'd play that in most blue decks. And then adding the red kicker that is like, hey, if your hand is low or your cards in your hand aren't good, then you just get to draw a card 2 for free.
Yeah, super good. And our last, it's a mythic rare, Luis.
Yeah.
And it might come up a little later. It's Timeless Lotus. 5 mana legendary artifact. ETB's taps for Wooburg. Are you taking it?
No, I'm going to take Battle Wing Mystic. Timeless Lotus, I had high hopes for it, but it did not, let's just say it didn't flower. It did not get there.
You're still waiting for the Timeless Lotus to bloom. Yeah, I like Battle Wing Mystic here too. That's a nice pickup. And also it can go in multiple archetypes. In blue-red, it's definitely at home, but you can play that in 5-color as well, and it can do pretty good stuff. Okay, let's get into the Sunset Show here. First up, if you could summarize the set in one sentence, what would that sentence be?
I think that it lived up to the Dominaria name, which is a compliment.
Okay, yeah, I say it's GOAT tier. Like, yeah. That's my sentence. This set is one of the best sets we've had ever. It's definitely one of the best sets in the last few years, and they've had some really good ones in there. Their consistency level has been very high. We've had a couple that we didn't like, but that's over, a 5-year span or a 4-year span or something like that. I mean, I think if we go post Ixalan, there's only really been a couple that we were like, not that excited about. But this one has been a real standout. To me, they hit multiple metrics with this set that are very difficult to balance, but when they come together, tends to make for a really fun, long-term replayable set. I mean, I'm bummed that this set's rotating. Like, I would love another month with it, which says a lot, because that wasn't true last time. If you listened to our last Sunset Show, we were done. And I really feel like the combination of like how even the colors are, the preponderance of mana fixing at common, and the fact that they managed to, like, there's no oppressive bombs in the set. There's no bomb that they play and you just can't win. Yes, there's very powerful cards. There's always going to be powerful cards. That's fine. I have no issue with that. But if you have a removal spell in your hand, there's effectively nothing that they can do that just makes you go, well, it didn't matter what I did up until now. If I have the removal spell, I can kill the thing and we can keep playing Magic. And the combination of all of those things coming together opens up a very wide palette. When you sit down to draft, you don't necessarily know what you're drafting after even a couple of picks. And I've had numerous times where I was, call it 3, 4, 5 picks into pack 2 before I really decided where I was going to be. And that to me makes it, that's what I love about Cube, right? That's what I love about the slower formats that I really like. And Dominaria United had that for me.
Yeah, it really did, I think, strike the right notes when it came to how many different decks there were, how they played. The fact that it's a set not dominated by bombs, though it had plenty of powerful cards, like it hit a good level there too. Because you don't want a set that has no cards you're really excited to open. That's part of the fun of the draft experience. But you also want a set where your gameplay decisions matter, and it's not like, oh, they played a Glorybringer on turn 5. What I did before then and what I do after that doesn't matter.
Right.
And Dominaria, I think, did a fantastic job on kind of all these fronts. So, yeah, very, very happy with the set.
Yeah, not perfect. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, but overall, absolutely GOAT tier for me. What were the best archetypes in Dominaria United?
So domain/5 color for sure.
Right.
Blue-red and to a lesser degree blue-white spells. Black-white tokens, red-white aggro, which also had a kind of tokeny feel to it. Those were like the main ones that ended up like once you started straying too much into any like, blue-green or red-green or green-black, like those decks just kind of veered a little more towards domain enough to the point where it felt like that's what those were.
Yeah, we have a big group here with 5 color that encompasses 3 colors with a splash higher, basically like anything above that where, yeah, I mean, people would hey, what's blue-green like in this format? It's like, well, it's not blue-green. It's blue-green red with some black, or it's just all 5, right? And it's like, well, what's black-green like? It's the same answer. So yeah, that bucket was very big, and there was a lot of different ways that you could build the different color combinations, but they sort of presented themselves as you drafted rather than being something that you'd repeat over and over again. And you would always be forced to kind of come up with a long-term game plan and draft cards that worked well together, not just a pile of cards that you could technically cast. They didn't have to be highly synergistic, but you needed to check all the boxes to make sure that like your fixing was in place. You had a good removal. You had places to put your mana in the late game, that you could cast all your spells, everything like that. And there was just a whole bunch of different decks that fell into that bucket. In fact, I would say most of them for me. I drafted those first 2 archetypes the most by a lot. Blue-red or blue-white, and then 5 color, 4 color, 3 color plus, that type of stuff. What cards were we most wrong about during the set reviews, or maybe that just surprised us one way or the other?
There's a pair of white removal spells, Artillery Blast and Destroy Evil, that both ended up certainly playing better than they looked initially to us. And then Shadow Prophecy is a big one too, because thought like, oh, this isn't really worth, trying to get to all these different colors of lands, and you're paying some life. It turns out it's closer to Dig Through Time than Divination. So definitely happy with how
it felt
Shadow
like
Prophecy
that.
played out.
I remember the first time that you said that on the show, and I was like, oh, wow, it does feel more like that when you cast it. Yeah, Destroy Evil got us too. That's a classic, right? And this is, I think, for people like you and I have been playing for a long time and doing set reviews for a long time too, these are the type of cards that can sneak by us, right? The ones that look like they're meant to be a sideboard card or a conditional card that you wouldn't want to main deck in very many formats, but actually have a really solid home. I mean, Destroy Evil ended up being like the best white removal spell. And, if you read it and you had never played the set, which is what we did, of course, for the set review, they print cards like that every other set, right? Where it's like, it has these 2 narrow applications. And usually those type of cards lend themselves to you being happy if you can find any target at all. And advanced players know that just simply finding a target for one of your spells isn't enough to make you happy. It has to also be a relevant target. So it makes it very, very difficult for cards like Destroy Evil to find a place in a format, but it absolutely did here. You were almost never without a target, and you were usually with good targets, such that even the second Destroy Evil was a perfectly playable card, which I would and did not predict during the set review. Those types of cards are a real curveball. Another one that we've seen see main deck play is a card like Broken Wings. Now, we didn't in this set. And that's where these type of cards normally fall, is that, you can bring in Broken Wings if your opponent has good targets, or if you feel like it would be particularly well suited. And that's what happened here. But we have in the past seen formats where Broken Wings was main deckable. And all of a sudden, if that's the case, it's like a very good card, right? It's like a removal spell in a color that doesn't get great removal spells. So, Destroy Evil with the curveball there. What were some of the underrated cards, or even are some of the underrated cards?
Impulse for sure. Just the fact spending 2 mana to make your draw a little more consistent and fill your graveyard with spells or get a spell trigger off card ended up really performing. Eerie Soul Tender, the 3/1 that mills you for 3, you can exile it from a graveyard to bring a creature back. Turns out it traded well enough and got you something back in the games that tended to be long, and worked out fairly well. And likewise, Urtai Scorn, the basically cancel with slight upside, where it's one cheaper if they play 2 spells. Turns out putting cancel in your like blue-red deck was actually fine. Like the way the deck played out, you could actually afford to do that, and there's some good expensive cards to cancel.
Yeah, the other one is what's it called? Double Raise Dead.
Oh, Urborg Repossession, yeah.
Right.
Fantastic.
And we're used to that now, and we were on it very early in the format. I thought it was one of the most important commons in the set, really in our first impressions or format breakdown show. And so it's easy to forget, how important that card is to the format now versus how we viewed it before, where there's some upside there. And we even remarked that the version of that in original Dominaria was very important too. I don't remember the name of it, but there was a double Raise Dead for 3 or whatever that was extremely good in Dominaria as well. And this one ended up being perhaps even more important. I mean, it was so good in the format. Ended up being, one of my most coveted commons to get a hold of, because if you faced any type of mid-range or long game matchup, that was the card that usually broke it open. Let's see, where are we? Controversial cards.
Controversial cards. I put Gaia's Might here because it does look like a combat trick, and that card still went pretty late. But it's also interesting because not every deck wants it. Though my argument is that more domain decks want Gaia's Might than people tended to play. The thought being, hey, I'm a controlling domain deck. I'm not really too worried about their life total. Then I don't need a combat trick. But Gaia's Might, if you're reliably having 4 or 5 colors of lands in play, is just so good that as long as you actually have creatures in play, the card is still worth playing. So I think the card got a little underplayed overall. And then likewise, Yavimaya Sojourner, the domain 4/6 that gets cheaper for every land type. The card looked kind of mediocre. We initially didn't think it was great, and it turns out it works out pretty well in defending yourself and just having good enough stats. When you play against red-white and you cast this on turn 4, pretty happy with how that all turns out.
Yeah, let's talk about that cycle for a minute. The expensive, cost reduction ones, because Tolarian Terror ended up being kind of the runaway hit from that cycle, but both the black and the red, I should just say all of them ended up seeing play. And I would say that that was a pretty successful balancing act that they hit, where they all kind of slotted into their archetype correctly. Power rankings wise, it was like tier 1 was blue, and then there's like a big gap, right? But the black one and the green one saw decent play in domain, and then the white one in aggro, and then I guess the red one's probably the least played, but it's still, those things were on the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, but all of them, do some work, and they're the sort of cards where when you play them at a deep discount, you really feel like you'd got away with something, which is kind of what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is interesting that they pushed some of them and not others, right? I mean, they all hit enough to see play on the battlefield, but like there's a limit to how cheap the Sojourner can get, and there isn't one. I mean, how many times did you play 2 Tolarian Terrors in one turn in this format? Like I did it a bunch,
Oh, I have the record for that. Sure.
You do? Oh, very nice. Yeah.
There's no way that you or anyone listening is actually going to be able to beat this. I chronicled it. There's even photo evidence. I tweeted it out. On turn 5, I cast the blue Defiler, and I played 5 Tolarian Terrors.
Oh my God. Are you serious?
Yeah, I had this is a 5 Tolarian Terror double Founding of the Path deck.
And they all cantripped?
And they all cantripped, and they cost me just 2 life. Like, they didn't cost me any mana. Turn 5, I cast, I don't remember the blue Defiler's name, and then just played 5 Tolarian Terrors.
Did you draw any terrors off?
Yeah, I drew a couple of them off of. Off of the previous ones.
I did not see this. I need to see.
So good.
Did you say you tweeted it?
Yeah. You can probably find it. I don't tweet that much anymore.
All right. That's incredible. Yeah. And I bow down to the Tolarian Terror Master. I didn't even get close to that. But at any rate, you could see how they had a real kind of strange balancing act with some of these, but they seem to have actually hit it pretty good. What was your favorite card artwork in the set?
I love Cut Down, the like white triangle, black background, just the symmetry of it. Very nice. Illustrated by Dominic Mayer.
Yeah, really good artwork there, because it stands out, right? Like if you just flash that card at me, I know what it is straight away, right? It has a very definitive vibe to it. This one's my favorite artwork. So normally if a set has a saga, I will try to pick a saga because I love the vertical artwork that they have. But this one actually hit me in a different way, and it is Tolarian Terror. And the reason that and it's by Vincent Christians, and the reason that I really like it is that it reminds me of old Magic art. Like,
sure.
I think you could take Tolarian Terror art and, throw that in an old frame and put it on, some card from when I was young, and I would buy it 100%. Where so much of the newer art, I actually really like it, but it doesn't look like the old art, right? Like it has like a different vibe. And this one to me gave me kind of old school Magic vibe. So that's why I picked that one. It's just a well executed one as well. What were the best build around cards in this set? The one that jumped to mind as being the sweetest, let's say, was Vesuvan Duplimancy, because there was timely interference and shore up in the set, both at common, both 1 mana, and easy to target your stuff with it so that you could start copying. It was very difficult to actually get set up, so I wouldn't call it, the best. Like, it wasn't a very good card, but if you opened it, you could take it and you would definitely get some number of timely interferences and shore ups to try to set up the combo and get some extra stuff in. What did you think of when you thought of the build around cards?
Well, Duplimancy was the first one I thought of. I had a deck where I played a turn 4 Solkanar off acceleration, turn 5 Duplimancy, copy it, because when you copy a legend, you get a non-legendary.
Yeah.
And that was great.
That's incredible. You had 2 Solkanars in play?
Yeah. I loved Solkanar, by the way. That was a really fun card.
Yeah.
For build-arounds, Tolarian Terror and Wrath Weatherlight Stalwart were both really good spell build-arounds, and certainly worth it. Like, when you had a draft that you started with an Essence Scatter and then a Lightning Strike, and then you took a Tolarian Terror, you were like, all right, I'm all in on just taking spells, and it actually was a good payoff.
No, that's a great point. The Tolarian Terror is probably the best build-around in the set, and we don't normally get commons.
That are that pushy, but when you play a 3-mana Tolarian Terror on like turn 5 while also playing something else, like it's just huge.
Yeah.
Wingmantle Chaplain, one of the biggest mistakes of the set, but also maybe the best build around in the whole set, because this is the one that makes a bird for every wall you have. There's a common that can tutor for this, like outrageous. So,
and the common is a wall,
of course.
Right. It's just silly. And then also, they did push Wingmantle Chaplain too, in the sense of like, it makes a bird when they come in subsequently as well. So there's no like tension on like, I want to get the big setup, so I have 5 walls out and then cast my Chaplain. So you can just cast to get your things and then get another one later. You're not really giving up anything.
Yeah, and then Golden Argosy, the vehicle that blinks things. You can blink your Myria's Outrider. You can blink your Wingmantle Chaplain. Like a lot of cool stuff to do. Phyrexian Rager, less than in a normal set because of Kicker, because it didn't work with Kicker, ETBs.
Right.
But that's probably for the best, because this card in a set with lots of ETBs would just be completely obnoxious.
It would. I think I played this in the Showdown, right?
Yeah, you had Argosy in your blue-black deck in the Showdown.
Yeah, and it did well with like Phyrexian Rager and stuff like that. Which card still looks good when you read it, but just doesn't see play?
I got a couple. I've got Rona, Shieldred's Faithful, the blue-black kind of like spell payoff. It turns out, yes, you could draft blue-black, but it just didn't happen that often. And the amount of times I felt like it was right to take Rona in the first like 8 picks of the draft, pretty low. And then Timeless Lotus, the mana acceleration that never was. I still think this card is good in like mirrors when you're just trying to go over the top, but it's too slow in most matchups.
It's funny because you mentioned Rona, but I think I could list off quite a few of the gold uncommon legends that, look, we have this as it just doesn't see play. Okay, fine. They see play, right? I'm not saying they're unplayable by any stretch, but they just kind of maybe appropriately aimed a little blow, like Zara Ojanin. It's like, okay, Erg. All right, I guess. Even like Tura Kennerud, the Sky Knight, it's like, that's a tough mana to be able to get down, have it survive Lightning Strike and still be able to cast something after that, right? It just asks a lot of you. what's it called? The Najal, the Storm Runner, the 2 blue, red, 5/4. Right. Look, again, has a good upside, but it's like it almost never actually happens. You know, Queen All in All of Rudok, that one makes the extra tokens and it's like similar, right? They just, you know, Garna, right? They're just like, they're so close. But so many of these just kind of missed narrowly, I would say. And again, that's probably good. Like they're still playable. You still saw those on the battlefield, and in the right scenario, they could really shine. But like, there was almost never a time where I was like, oh, I opened Garna. We did it. Right. It was like, yeah, okay. I guess I'm in those colors. I will play this spell, you know, versus it being like exciting. Was this a Prince or a Pauper set?
Not close. Just a Pauper. It's Pauper all the way through. But I think in a good way. In a way that's not like there were no good rares or they were unimportant. It's just the commons were good enough to stop the rares at a reasonable rate. And, you know, you ended up with, I think, better gameplay as a result. It's rare that we're really fans of like the sets that care about lots of high rarity cards.
Right. We would almost always prefer a Pauper flatter curve set, and we got it here. Easiest one ever. What's the It's a Bad Card, but I love it anyway award winner?
Timeless Lotus.
Will you sign my Timeless Lotus?
Of course.
Oh man, I love it. I love that card. You talked me into it. I played it. It was awesome when I played it because I had that one type of deck that could actually just hammer out a bunch of stuff. You know, I cast 2 big spells the next turn and just sort of ran away with it. It didn't hold up over the format, but it was sweet. That card's really cool. What's the I literally never win with it, but it always seems to beat me card for you?
Molten Monstrosity. They always just have the Molten Monstrosity on like turn 5 when I'm under pressure and they've just like, you know, enlisted with their like brute and like hit me for 6 damage, and then they play this, and I don't know. I don't put this card in my deck very often, but I do lose to it a fair amount.
It was also frustrating because you would often be put in a position where they would enlist, and then you have to decide, okay, do I want to trade off like 2 things or take the big risk or just take the hit? Because if they have a combat trick, you get blown out. And you're like, oh, I'll just take the hit. And then they play the stupid thing post-combat. And you're like, if I would have blocked, you know, that thing might have been stuck in their hand. But it never worked out like that. For me, one of them was Jinna the Fountain. You know, we recognized pretty early that card was a bit too expensive. And after having tried it out in the early part of the format, it was way too expensive. It was a card I never wanted, really ever. But it turns out, you know, in the right scenario, if somebody wants to dump 6 mana into this thing, it does do stuff. It is it has a level of power once on the battlefield, and I've lost to it a few times. The other one is Impede Momentum. Felt like there was a very narrow use case for it overall, and even that didn't come through all the time. Like, you really have to have the pump up creatures in the blue-red deck to take advantage of a card like Impede Momentum. And or just be aggressive, and since it's blue, that just didn't happen that much. But it is a high leverage card. When people cast it against me, it acted as removal and sometimes knocked me out.
Yeah, but that's another card that I don't think was great, but it did have its moments.
Right, I never played it myself. This is a funny one. What was my opponent played this, so now I must win or quit Magic forever card?
Easily Llanowar Stalker, the 1-mana 1/1 that when you play a creature gets +1. So I don't really get the card. Like, it doesn't feel very green. It's certainly not very good, and it doesn't do with anything of the green's theme. So
right,
yeah, really confused by it.
Yeah, that was a funny one because sometimes when I'm playing, I have like a little like Post-it notes thing next to me. And if there's a card that pops up that I think we might want to talk about on the Sunset, I'll just jot it down. And I have a Post-it note right here, and it says DMU Sunset, and it says win or quit Llanowar Stalker. And when we were filling out the sheet, Luis had already filled out Llanowar Stalker. So yeah, I guess that one wins. Good news is I don't think I ever lost to that card. It's so horrendously bad. What was the biggest groan test for this set?
I think that Herd Migration is definitely the card where that took, I think I'm winning this game to I think I'm losing this game, you know, the fastest, because 5/3/3s is really hard to answer, you know, unless you had there's not very many sweepers in the set, and temporary lockdown's not a card I would play, for example. So when they cast the Herd Migration, it was pretty tough.
Yeah, for me, it was Cruelty of Gix. Look, it's a powerful card, so obviously it's really tough. But the groan reason is because they cast it, and you don't lose right then, and you don't lose next turn, and you don't lose the turn after that, and then you lose, and it's like you have to watch. And then you do lose, and you have to watch your opponent, be like, which card do I want to take from your hand? And it's like, oh God. And then imagine this in paper as well. They pick up their whole library, start sifting through it, pull out a couple of contenders. What do I want to put in my hand? I think I'll take this one. And you're looking at your hand of 2 lands and you're just like, I'm so dead. And then they get the best creature back from a graveyard and it's over. But you have to wait. Like, maybe you'll draw something in between or whatever. So that's my Grown Test winner. What was the most frustrating, quote, bad card to lose to? What card will you not miss playing against, or maybe just one that annoyed you?
Stronghold Arena, because that was the one where when they hit you, they get to draw a card, or they get to Dark Confidant, rather.
Yeah. Because
when you lose to that card, it's because they were attacking you and they were beating you, and it just feels like this shouldn't work, but sometimes it did. I mean, it was a powerful card in the right circumstances, though. I don't think an ultimately very good card.
No, that's a great one, because and when they play it and it doesn't do anything, you're like, yeah, well, I'm attacking you, so how does that feel? One I hated was the main deck temporary lockdown, because I could just never really play around it, and you do the Wingmantle thing or something, and then they cast that, and you're like, really? Like, honestly, you have that card in your main deck? The other one that came up, and maybe this is a good place, I guess we'll talk about them near the end as well, but the tribal rares, the Are You Lost cards for the set, like, why are you here? They have absolutely no home here. They're regular rares, so you actually see them somewhat frequently, particularly if you play sealed, like for an arena open or something, and they just have nothing. But one time, somebody played the stupid elf, and then they played the Llanowar Stalker, and then they played the I think the one that clones if you kick it as an elf or whatever.
Sure, the Biomancer.
Yeah, and then they played another of the stupid rare. They got 2 of them, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm actually losing to the elves deck here. And that has to be frustrating, because it's just like the set wasn't made for that, and the person just pushed it through and it got there anyway. What was the bombiest bomb? What was the one you wanted to open the most? Shieldred the Apocalypse.
By so much. Right? It just the card was just absolutely out of control good. I mean, I lost this card in Legacy the other day.
Yeah, I was watching that card, since it's particularly good in Legacy. But again, I have to say props to the team that designed this, because that's the best card in the set. And you know what it dies to? Quite a bit of removal. You can bounce evil, it. Yeah.
Extinguish the light, Fires of Victory if you have enough cards in hand. Right.
And I get it that it doesn't die to everything. That's fine. It's a mythic bomb. Like, it shouldn't just, fold to any removal spell. But, if you've managed your removal and you've drafted it and not use it on the first thing you saw, or use your board state or your life total, you could easily have an answer for Shieldred and then continue with the game. Of course, they immediately play, what's it called? They dig it back and then you lose. But yeah. All right.
Let's talk. It was good that you opened Shieldred in the showdown. That's the time when you.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it was insane for me, right? Like, it basically went unchecked that whole showdown. It was like, well, and to my credit, I played a Shore Up and Urborg Repossession too, so I had like 4 Shieldreds. Best common for each color. Now, this is a really interesting one. So for white, I have Argivian Cavalier. Straight by the numbers, it's Take Up the Shield and Destroy Evil, and then Argivian Cavalier, but they're all really close. And I would take Argivian Cavalier over Take Up the Shield. I would usually take Destroy Evil over Argivian Cavalier, but I felt like if you are white, then the Cavalier is where I wanted to be the most. What do you think? Do you think it's Destroy Evil, Take Up the Shield, or Argivian?
I think Cavalier is more important than the other two to most white decks.
Yeah.
Destroy Evil is the best if you're going to end up in like 5-color or blue-white spells. And Take Up the Shield is good in any deck with creatures. So yeah, they're all pretty close. You're ideally not first picking any of them. And if you have a little more info, like if you're in red-white, you probably want Cavalier Take Up the Shield a little more. If you're in black-white, Cavalier is almost always going to be the pick. And if you're in like blue-white or 5-color, you're going to take Destroy Evil. But they're all the same range.
There you go. For blue, it's Essence Scatter, number 1. And then 2 really notables, though. Tallest Lookout, that card performed really well. And then our boy, the Tolarian Terror. So I guess it's just scatter. For black, it's Extinguish the Light with an honorable mention to Phyrexian Rager. Red is Lightning Strike with an honorable mention to Marius Outrider. And green, I want to know what you think. I'll tell you what the 1, 2, and 3 are according to 17 lands, because I had to go look it up because I'm like, I don't know what the best green common is. They're very flat.
So if I was in Domain, which I frequently was when I was green, I liked the Root Walla
Okay.
the most because it was a good 2-drop that was good later in the game. Guys might also great there. So those are like the 2 green cards I took the most at common. Elix was the highest on at common.
Okay. Yeah. So 17 lands has Gaia's Might, then Magnagoth Sentry, and then Root Walla, and they're very close.
Yeah, Sentry's fine too.
Yeah. Now, there's an interesting thing here, though, is we can shoehorn in some other cards that are technically gold, but we might have higher. So, for example, in blue, it was Essence Scatter, but Tolarian Geyser is the card that I think was the best blue common. And that one, you don't have to kick, like that. The kick was a bonus on it. So, like, I would actually have that as the best common, even though it's technically a gold card because it has the white symbol on it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then like in red, I think Lightning Strike is the best, though Keldon Strike Team's on the list. But again, this is different. If you don't play white, then Keldon Strike Team's a lot worse, just as a 3/1 haste for 3. Another blue card is Phyrexian Espionage, which is kind of in the middle of those two. Like you'd much prefer to be able to kick it, but you could just play it without. And then in black, Tribute to Urborg, same thing. Like you can play it without, but you really would prefer to kick it. And then also in black is Urborg Repossession that we mentioned before, which I don't think quite gets above Extinguish the Light. But, if you're kicking it, you can definitely take that card over Extinguish if that's the thing that you need. So
yeah, you almost always will take Extinguish, but if you're straight blue-black, you can justify it.
Yeah, there you go. One of the easiest categories, what was a mythic uncommon for this set?
So not only is Wingmantle Chaplain the mythic uncommon for this set, I think that you can argue that you should take it over every rare. Shielded may be an exception, but something like Cruelty of Gix, like I think the fact that your Wingmantle Chaplain has a common that can tutor for it that's not a high pick, like people who aren't drafting defenders are just never taking your Shield Wall Sentinels, means that maybe it's just the best card to take because it's like a bomb level card that you get multiple copies of.
That's very compelling. Yeah. I mean, it factors in like maybe just outside of the top 10 total with Shieldred being number 1. But yeah, you can splash it, always play it, and always get multiple copies. It's pretty incredible. It also has a very, very high ALSA. For an uncommon, it's around 3. Wow. Yeah. Shieldred's ALSA is 1.1.
No one ever passes it.
Wow. Like at any point. Like that's just incredible. So yeah, Wingmantle Chaplain and its best friend, easily mythic uncommon. What was the worst card in the set?
Urza Assembles the Titans, because it was a saga that cared about planeswalkers. So
the white one?
Yep, not even close.
Oh God. Yeah, Terrible. Really, really bad. Well, okay, here's your specialty. What was what card was the most begrudgingly playable?
Nailed it. Voda Sea Scavenger.
Oh, a blue card. That's nice. Usually it's green.
Man. I figured it. The thing is, I figured out the secret to this. Most begrudgingly playable is always a 3-mana 2/3 or 3/2 that has an ability that's not quite worth it. But you can put the card in your deck because a 3-mana 3/2, like the automatic librarian also, right? The 3/2 that scries too. It's like the same thing. Like these cards are, they make the cut and you're not thrilled about it.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. He still got it, folks. Is there a card you'll miss drafting?
There's a lot of cards I'll miss drafting. This was a fun set. Tolarian Geyser was a really fun one to play. Jodas Codex is a fun one to play. Urborg Repossession, also a fun one to play. Just these cards are really cool. Yeah,
I'll miss Phyrexian Espionage. Like, that hits that sweet spot when you kick it, right? It maintains the tension on the game, right? Like, they have to discard a card. You spend 5 mana to do kind of nothing for the turn, but you're ostensibly pulling ahead in the macro sense. And, so it's not just like you play it and you win. It's like you set yourself up to win later, probably.
Yeah.
And that's the best kind of tension, right? So I'll miss that one. I'll miss Tolarian Terror. I love that card. That was a really fun one to play. Super simple card. And there's a whole bunch. Man, I'll miss this set a lot. What was the LSVEist card and the Martialist card of the set?
Well, see, on one hand, I think Phyrexian Espionage, it's divination with slow upside that sometimes can get you a little bit of value.
Deep in your wheelhouse.
But I'm starting to think Gaia's might be it. I don't know. Like, am I really a beatdown player?
Is this the new you? I mean, you drafted beatdown in the showdown too with Gaia's Might.
With a bunch of Gaia's Mights. And
oh
I ended
my
up,
God!
Red green domain aggro, and I went 3-0. So,
Do you remember when you had that stretch where you drafted mono red and cube for a while? This might just be that, like a little sidestep for you, just a little outside, but you'll come back, you'll come back. I still think you're a Phyrexian Espionage guy.
Yeah, I think that.
I don't view you as a Gaia's Might player, at least not yet. For me, Martialist card, Ether Channeler. Good God. I was like partly excited and partly just sad at how far they've knocked down my precious Mana War. Ether Channeler is just like an absurd version of a Mana War now. But that's definitely like that's my vibe right there. What was my soapboxiest card? It was Elfham Worm, and Friends. I really latched on early to the idea that an important part about this set is to try to draft creatures that can generate you advantage on some level, card advantage, I mean. And I found that especially in a set where, the best common in the set is Tolarian Geyser, that casting things like Elfham Worm is just not where you want to be. You'd much rather cast things that have enter the battlefield effects rather than just kind of push power and toughness, which Elfham Worm has. I mean, that's the reason that it's on here is because it actually looks pretty good. And no, I'd call it playable. But, that to me was, if you played a bunch of cards like that, you were just asking to get ran over by any of the slower mid-range to control decks. And I remember talking about that quite a bit. So Elfham Worm. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you?
Yeah, so every time I play against Lord Tupwar, I've got to read Yosha Declares War.
He played it against me too. And
I'm
all
pretty sure I know what it
does
does now, but yeah, no, that card's a reader.
It did 1 damage and it produced an Ornithopter. I was
Sometimes
fine
you
with
took 4
this.
damage from the Ornithopters afterwards, though.
Wow.
Last
Mine
chapter,
is
yeah.
Founding the Third Path, which saw not very much play, but just enough so that it would show up occasionally and I'd have to be like, what does that do? And the weird part is that I even put it in my deck a few times and still had to read it when I cast it. Just to
It's
be
a
like,
weird one.
what do I do again? Yeah.
The fact that it casts a spell for free, then later lets you recast a spell, but it's not free, makes
Right.
for a confusing card. When you have two very similar abilities, but they're meaningfully different, yes.
Yeah. So that was my have to read it. Okay. So let's get into some of the bigger topics here. From a design and development aspect, how did this set fare?
Set was great. So when you look at a return set, right? This is a Dominaria United. This isn't even the second time we've been at Dominaria. Obviously, that's where a lot of Magic settings are. But even more specifically, Dominaria and Invasion are both sets that were set here. There are some. It's kind of tricky because when you're in a new world, you can just do all new stuff, and that's great. But when you're returning, you don't have to make up as much new stuff because you can redo some of it or retread some of it. You have some inspirations to draw from. But you want to feel similar, but also new and different, and you want to do both. And that can be a challenge. And I think Dominaria United really exceeded there because it was able to kind of do a lot of good callbacks, right? They had new versions of some legends we had seen before. They had an old mechanic, kicker. Everything's kicker, haha. They have domain. Like, these aren't new mechanics, but the way these decks played out, the way the cards played out, it was new. It felt different enough, and it felt, really fun to play. So it's really struck a good balance between these are things you know and love. They play a little different than before. Like, these domain decks played a little different than before. We've never had domain with these duels that counted as both types at common, and that was a pretty big difference. And there was also some good 2-color decks. The decks actually felt like distinct decks, right? The blue-red spells deck did not feel like all the blue-red decks are the same. Red-white aggro, that's a bit more of a deck that we've seen before, maybe. But, you just had decks that felt like way more than collections of cards. I would say that the decks were very high on synergy. Like, you didn't draft black-green deck. You drafted probably a domain-ish black-green deck with a lot of good graveyard synergies. There was a lot of cool stuff going on, and overall, great gameplay, great flavor. Like, this is what you look for out of a return set. I mean, obviously you want that out of any set, but it did the return thing really well.
Mm-hmm. They really stuck the landing, yeah. Yeah,
I think it did. And it even had some good judicious reprints, right? Like Gaia's Might's a reprint, and it played out really well in the set. I think that's really cool. There's 2 main misses for me. One is that Wingmantle Chaplain, just not an acceptable card to print, especially with Shield Wall Sentinel to go get it. It just made playing against the wall decks really obnoxious because, the wall decks are kind of obnoxious to begin with. They're a bunch of defenders, and they have like a wall that mills you and stuff, right? That's already from the start, you're like, But then also, what percentage of wall decks you played against had Chaplain? It felt like 90%, because why else would you be playing walls? The deck didn't really win without that, at least not that often. So Wingmantle Chaplain was just, I think it detracted from the format. If you could just delete it, it would make the format better.
Do you think it was Shield Wall Sentinel's fault?
Yeah, it definitely. If you could delete one of the two, actually, I would delete Shield Wall Sentinel. Like, I think, and just let you have the Wingmantle Chaplain some of the time, but not all the time.
Yeah, that's what I felt too, because the problem was that you could get effectively 3 or 4 Wingmantle Chaplains in your deck once you got the first one. And if there was only one and you only had to face it every once in a while, it probably would have been okay.
And then the other thing was, you kind of mentioned it before with the tribal rares. There was that cycle of tribal lords with no support in the set, barely any support. The soldier one maybe did something sometimes. And there was a bunch of like straight up commander cards, like just legendary creatures that had abilities like Revaz of the Claw with no dragons or very little dragons.
Aster, Bearer of Blades.
Right. But there's multiple equipment aura type creatures, and it just doesn't make sense. Like, isn't that the whole point of having set boosters or commander sets that come out in conjunction with these sets? Put those there. Don't put them in the set that people play limited for. Like, why are these cards here? I think that actually did detract from it, because you get to the point, especially when the set first comes out, you're like, "Ooh, I opened a gold rare in my colors. What does it do?" And you read it, you're like, "What the hell?"
Yeah.
So,
right, and it provides a little bit of confusion too, right? Like,
oh, totally.
Like about what direct, like if you open Maria, Scholar of Antiquity, or Joyra, Ageless Innovator, you're going,
is there an artifact set here?
I'll draft around this, or something. And it's like, no, you would be horribly, and we mentioned Aster. Aster has the text on it. Vehicles you control have crew 1. There's like 2 vehicles in this set, and they're only there for flavor reasons, not for set. It's just bizarre.
And one of them has crew 1.
It does, yeah.
Though the Weatherlight one, Weatherlight Completed, doesn't have a crew cost.
You can't even crew it. Oh my god.
No. This is actually a really good combo, because now you can crew it.
Oh, it gives it that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. That's actually really cool.
But
yeah.
I think they did detract, and we're not exaggerating. There was like between 10 and 15 cards like this.
Yes.
Probably closer to 15.
Yes.
You count like the 5 tribal lords.
All the tribal ones, and then a bunch of the gold ones. Yeah.
Right. And then as for what the set taught us, how did the set make us better at limited, and some takeaways? I love me a good lesson on when to take lands. This was going back to that. Like,
oh yeah.
When do you take the lands? Which ones do you take? Do you take them 3rd pick? Do you try to wheel them? Do you try to take them 5th pick? Cool stuff, and there's no real right answer or really consensus on that. And I like the fact that it was really just a lesson on synergy again. It was hard to win in Dominaria with a deck that had no synergy. So, I always like formats like.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I knew this to a point, but it's a good reminder that like if you can get a set that has a few key things in place, it usually will work itself out. Flat power levels on the card and color level, like those really matter. Good mana, right? Like all my favorite sets have access to mana fixing, that isn't free, but like that is there if you want it. Going, especially if you're willing to prioritize it, like you were talking about with the lands a minute ago, and then getting the rares right where there's no oppressive ones, right? Because it's easy to fall into the trap of complaining about whatever the best rare is, but that is not productive at all. It is totally productive to talk about bombs that are unanswerable or just realistically can't be answered in the format. You know, some of the worst offenders of all time have fit that description. You know, one of the reasons that Pack Rat way back in the day was so oppressive is because there was like 2 cards in the whole set that answered it on turn 2, and they were difficult to cast, and one of them was a sideboard card, right? It's like, okay, so that's not very, you know, that lines up horrendously. And then some of them just produce so much value upon entering the battlefield that it makes it difficult. You know, cards like Troxel and stuff like that, that if they stick around for any amount of time, then you won't win that game. And that wasn't the case here. There was some very powerful rares. It wasn't like they just chopped the legs out of all the rares. Shieldred's really tough card to beat. But if you had your removal, you could do it. You know, Archangel of Wrath got you a lot of value in an ETB, but you could beat it. And man, I would love it when they hit that balance, because you said it before, and I will reiterate it. You know, we are not on the Ben S level where we just said, like, let's just take rares out of the packs for limited. You and I both enjoy opening a sweet rare. We both understand that players get excited about that in draft, and that it's a really fun, unique experience when you only draft once a week and you open some sick bomb and get to kind of ride it to victory. That's part of one of the things that is good about limited. So you don't want to just chop those out, but when they are unanswerable is when it gets out of hand. And this format meant that they weren't. And the combination of that, the balance of power level from both the card and color statuses, and then the good mana, to me, that's the recipe, man. Like you give me that stuff and I'm going to have a great format. The one thing that also helps with that, and then this happened to have, but most sets do, is a good early, good late mechanic, like kicker or morph, something like that. And I'm going to love every format that ends up playing out like that. One thing that also I thought was cool about this too, is that there is an aggro deck in the format. In fact, there's a couple, but primarily the red-white deck is in fact, it's usually the most successful archetype if you can get it. And that's really important. This stuff is not as fun if all we do is draft 4-color, 5-color piles every time. And it's just this sort of mishmash of a bunch of different cards jammed together, and who can actually cast their spells, and, you know, who balance out their deck the best and try to win. You can get that out of some cubes, and there's been formats like that. This isn't. There's a fun police. Like if you show up with a really slow deck, you can absolutely get ran over by red white. And I like that. That's important to have that check and balance on the whole system, because it keeps everything a little bit closer to the middle and makes you actually think about your picks a lot more, rather than saying what's either the most powerful thing I can do out of this pack or the best mana fixing. And that's your whole algorithm, right? That's not actually that fun over the long term. For a while, that is actually pretty fun, but it does tend to lose at some point. So I really like that they balanced it out, that part as well. All right. This is a big one, Luis. What grade would you give this set?
I think it's pretty obvious at this point that we're both going to give the set an A.
Yeah, like, it's just an A.
The range is A- to A+, and it would be weird if we give it any other grade than those based on.
Yeah,
it's a great set. Don't have it quite A+ level, but I would say A, well-deserved A.
Agree. I think that it to get to A+, they would have needed to have shored up the dead rares. It really felt like there was a missed opportunity there, right? They've got a lot of design space to play with. They ended up, you know, a bunch of the rares that we just talked about are gold, which are really an interesting spot for some wacky or cool build around stuff or something like that. And instead it was Maria, Scholar of Antiquity, you know, and it was just, it's a 3/3, right? And it was Rivaz. Oh, it's a 3/3, but this one has Menace and a heck of a lot of text that you don't want to ever read. And then, as we mentioned before, the cards like Leaf Crown Visionary just felt completely lost in the format. And with, you know, I just wonder what they could have done with that design space that would have fit the limited format a little bit better. And that would have been pretty cool. All right. What was your favorite card of the format?
I think Tolarian Geyser. I got to cast it a lot. It was a lot of fun.
Okay. So I think I'm going to audible mine, because this is very much a gut check, right? And I had an interesting experience. I don't know if you've ever felt like this, Luis, but it reminds me of what I'm looking at right here, which is I was at, there's a watch club here in Seattle that I'm in, and there was 2 watches on the table in front of me and one of the other guys in the club. And I said, which one, like, if you could just pick one, which one would you take? And they didn't belong to him. And he had a really funny answer. He said, I want to be the type of person that would pick this one, but I am the type of person that would pick this one. Yeah. And I put herd migration down here because I want to be that person, but my favorite card of the format is Tolarian Terror. I love that card. I love building around it. I love the artwork, and it has become one of my favorite creatures in quite a long time. So I'm going with the gut check. Yes, I love me a herd migration. It is the card I'd want to open the most out of any card in the set. And hilariously, I just refuse to acknowledge that it has any more text than the 7 mana spot. Like, I think I'd rather lose than cycle it for a land. But at any rate, I am going Tolarian Terror, my beautiful serpent boy. And I'm going to ride that thing into the sunset. So fantastic job, Wizards on Dominaria United. Really just an absolute home run. You know, we can nitpick about this stuff, but the bottom line is this set is an A. And the fact that a new set is coming and I feel distracted by that because I'd rather just be playing this. The fact that we're going to talk about it in a minute, but there's an arena open happening this weekend and it's not this set. And I wish it was. These are the biggest compliments that I can give to a set. So 2 things to talk about before we go. First, we do have our preview card for the next set, which I just mentioned, and it is really good. And it has an absurd name. It's Gurgling Anointer, and it is 2 and a black for a 1/3 flying Phyrexian horror. It's uncommon. And it says, whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And whenever it dies, return another target creature card with mana value less than or equal to its power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's a 1/3 flyer for 3. And if you draw extra cards, it gets bigger. And when it dies, you can get stuff back from your yard. This card is sweet.
I mean, all it's asking is having ways to draw extra cards in your deck. So I think I can clear that threshold.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that the card looks awesome, and hopefully there's a lot more to come from that. And then the other thing to mention is there is an arena open this weekend, and it is Dominaria, the OG. It's the 8 years ago Dominaria.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn this, but we are getting an open, which I'll certainly plan. It is worth noting it's sealed both days.
Okay.
I think that it makes sense. I would rather draft, but for folks who haven't drafted before, just 2 days of sealed makes so much more sense. I think they're going to have more entrants as a result. Yeah,
that probably does make sense. Let me, if you want to get caught up on it, you can go back in time to 2018, the 400s episode. We did a bunch of episodes on Dominaria. The set review came out on episode 437 and 438. And then we've got our first impression show. We had Ben Stark to talk about it. We did archetypes, tips and tricks, and a sunset show that ended up being with Kenji as well. So there you go. If you want to check that out, you might be able to get up to speed on Old Dominaria. It is a fantastic set. Okay, that's going to do it for this show. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. We'd like to thank our sponsors, TCG Player. We've got a link in the show notes for you to an affiliate link if you'd like to pick up anything from TCG Player and check out the TCG Player subscription, which now has CFB Pro as part of it as well. We would like to thank FTX for their continued sponsorship of the show. We really do appreciate them. And of course, all of our patrons. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com. That's going to do it for this week. We'll see you next time.
I wanted to give folks a crash course on some Dominaria cards for the open this weekend, if you're listening to this before then. Since it is going to be sealed, we've got some quick hits for you. You certainly want to main deck Invoke the Divine. That's the white destroy artifact or enchantment gain 4. So in general, blue, black, and green are going to be your best bets for colors. Obviously, you can end up in any color. It's sealed. You can always open 12 good cards in a color and a bomb or whatever. But Sultai were the colors I tended to play most frequently. And part of it is
Slimefoot me, baby.
Yeah, Slimefoot, the stowaway, the black-green uncommon was great. Part of it is look at these black commons that are great and sealed. There's Caligo Skin Witch, which is 2 mana 1/3. Or 6 mana, 1/3 that makes them discard 2 cards. Dark Bargain, 4 mana, look at the top 3, choose 2 of them, and then if you put them in your hand, you lose 2 life. Feral Abominations actually have solid sealed cards. 5 and a black for a 5/5 Death Touch. It actually kind of did some work. And then Soul Salvage for Urborg Repossession fans. It's 2 and a black, get back 2 creatures from your graveyard.
Yeah, that's
as well as Windgrace Acolyte, 5 mana, 3/2 flyer, mill 3, gain 3. These cards are all just great, and I just named 5 black commons without even naming the best black commons like Eviscerate and Vicious Offering. So black, very deep roster for sealed. And then there's a couple cards that you might not know are great. Haphazard Bombardment, enchantment for 5 and a red, and you put counters on 4 permanents, and you can choose lands. This is very important. And then at the end of your turn, it randomly destroys one of those permanents until there's only 2 counters left. So, or one of them left. So basically, it kills 3 random permanents for 6 mana.
Over time,
one each turn. Really strong card. And sometimes you just play, if you accelerate or are on the play or something, you have a land roll if you're on the play, just put it on your opponent's lands. They probably can't win.
It's really mean.
But it also looks like a goofy card with the randomization and the counters and stuff, just letting you know it's a very good card, worth splashing even. Fungal Plots is another great one. It's an enchantment for 1 and a green that lets you sack 2 Saprolings to draw a card and gain 2 life, and pay 1 and a green and exile a creature card from your graveyard to put a 1/1 Saproling into play. Super obnoxious card. Really, really strong.
Grindy.
Works well with the other Saproling makers.
Oh, man, I'm getting so excited for this.
I know, these are all really cool cards. And then, of course, the best bomb of sealed, the card you want to open the most at common. Big Skits, Skittering Surveyor, 3 mana, 1/2. When ETB, search your deck for a basic land, put it in your hand. Just the perfect card. So good luck opening some skits and enjoying Dominaria Sealed. I know I'm going to.